Welcome to the Stray Pointers podcast, where seemingly ordinary people join us for extraordinary discussions. You're listening to episode 9 of the Stray Pointers podcast. This episode of the Stray Pointers podcast was recorded on October 18th, 2023. I'm your host, Jim Lawless. For links to items referenced in the podcast, please see the show notes for this episode at straypointers.com. Tonight, our guest is software engineer and BBS wizard Ben Kimball. Ben, thanks for being on the show.
Good to be here.
Hey, Ben, I've known you for quite a while, so I know a bit about your history, and yours is one in a series. I'm trying to do a series on the electronic bulletin board phenomena of the 80s and 90s, and just tried to talk to people who were there. And you were probably a bigger participant in that you played so many different roles in that era. I'd kind of like to talk about that. If we could start, you tell me a little bit about how you got into programming.
Well, I had an opportunity that most people my age didn't have. I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and from first grade to third grade, I would go to this in-home daycare, just the lady and a few kids watching us, until my parents got off work. Turned out her husband was a professor of computer science at Purdue University at Fort Wayne and had a teletype back when nobody had home computers.
Sure.
And so I guess that was the buzz in the day. If you teach somebody a foreign language at a young age, it becomes so natural to them, where if you try to learn it as an adult, it's not as natural. So that was the thing. So I'm the product of an unethical experiment where he was like, what happens when we take this 7-year-old and try to teach him basic programming, And I'm very honored or very happy, or I owe the guy a lot,
Sure.
And even funnier, when I first met you at the bank, he was teaching at Creighton. I did not know that until after. So if anybody in the Omaha area knew a Dr. Gayer, that was him. That was the guy. But he had left by the time I realized he was here, and now I don't think he's with us anymore. But
wow,
yeah,
that's amazing. So you learned BASIC at 7. When did you get your first micro then?
Well, my first was, I share my first name with my dad, and when I was like 14, I snagged a check from him and went down and bought a VIC-20 when, $300 or whatever, and they sold it to me. He was not happy, but as years have gone by, he's quite happy that he invested in me.
So I have to ask you, have you ever read Kevin Savitz's book, Terrible Nerd?
I have not.
Okay, I'm going to spoil a section of it for you and for both of my listeners here. When he wanted desperately to have a computer. He's one of the hosts of the Atari Antic podcast now. He's interviewed all kinds of very interesting people. But there was a church raffle, and they were raffling off a TI 99 4A, and he wanted that computer, and he got to be the person that grabbed the lot of paper out of the big fishbowl. And so his mom dropped her name in there, and he looked at where it was, and he reached in and caught it between his fingers, and then reached in and dug around the fishbowl and was just doing this big dramatic scene and pulled it out, and oh well, Mrs. Savitz won it. And so he took it home. It was like everybody at the church kind of looked at him strange after that, but he didn't
get it.
Struck by lightning or anything like that. So
yeah, the same thing. I had to have one, even though it was a 4K VIC-20. I just had to have one, including in 7th grade, I was permanently banned from Target stores, although they let me shop there all the time. That's what they told me. I stole a calculator. It was the closest thing I could get to a computer back then. And I got caught. And yeah, so yeah, I learned I'm not a good thief. So as you know, I'm a trustable guy. So I have not stolen anything since.
That's interesting. I wonder what Dr. Geyer would think of his experiment if he'd heard those parts of it.
Yeah.
So you got a VIC-20. Did you did you code mostly in BASIC? Did you learn
Yeah, then it was just basic.
6502?
I a little bit would I never had an assembler, so I did a little bit of screwing around with pokes and peaks, and then about a year later, talked my grandma into buying me a Commodore 64, which I swore I would pay her back. Yeah, but then when I was like, "Hey, how about I give you twice what you paid for that now that I'm established and grown up?" And she said, "You know what? Don't worry about it. I've seen what you've done, and I'm very proud of you. So it's a gift now." But yeah, and so really scammy to get in the world, and ever since then, no stealing.
So what types of stuff did you do on your 64 then?
uh, I mean, obviously at first games, but I grew up south of Kearney, south of Fort Kearney even, and just I had no neighbors for a mile. I didn't even know those neighbors. There's no kids in my neighborhood. I grew up, well, my early childhood was in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I'm used to being around a lot of people. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, and luckily I didn't have a video game system, so that was the closest I had. Hold on, I gotta turn this off. Sorry. Hi, yeah. Spammers. And um so I'd ride the bus home from school, and my dad wouldn't be home for several hours, and no friends around, and I couldn't drive yet. So that's what I did. I'd get those like Commodore 64 magazines where you type in games or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and do that stuff. Plus, there was a guy that I eventually met that was from Kearney that had like two or three small game programs published in Compute Gazette or whatever.
Okay.
And I just worship that guy, and the best thing for me was to watch him code one time, because until then I thought you had to plan everything out, and if you made a mistake, you're a bad programmer. I
Mm-hmm.
got to watch him do iterative development for the first time, where he was trying to make kind of a Pac-Man clone, but and I watched him, like all of a sudden the ghost would go like right down the walls instead of in between the walls,
Mm-hmm.
and watch him go, "Oh, that's not quite right, and I'm like, "Oh, you can do that," and then cool, from then on, that's how you do it, make your best attempt, and then make it better.
Good deal. So was that the machine where you first used a BBS?
Yeah, the Commodore 64, yes. I got the 2400 baud modem, and there used to be Quantum Link. It was based, aimed at Commodore 64 and 128 users, which actually that same company became something we all know called AOL,
Yep.
American Online. But
Yep.
at the time it was just that, and I had a great time with it until my dad got the phone bill, because there was no local numbers in Kearney. So yeah, that was the end of that.
So then tell me how did you go about getting yourself into the BBS craze? Were you a user first, or did you decide you wanted to run your own, or what was the deal there?
I mean, my biggest thing was the big ones like Quantum Link, and I had been on CompuServe in the past too, and even that teletype in the original was dial up. So I always thought that was pretty cool. And let's see, where do I go with this? I wanted to run one. I started running one on some software called RYBBS, so lesser known, but I thought I really liked the way they laid it out. Like you had each menu with whatever you wanted to. It was totally dynamic, and then you'd set security on what you could see for each
And
availability so that you could control that.
and what type of machine was this on?
That was on my old 386-25.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that was the first one, and then I had an opportunity with a friend of mine that works in Omaha now, but he you should run his own little software development company, and had a deal with what was it called back then, TransUnion. And it's one of the big um,
On the credit unions?
yeah, one of the credit unions
Mm-hmm.
now, but they changed their name. Anyway, he wanted me to write something to where their agents could, upload stuff to headquarters. And so I started to learn that, and figured out, and I don't know, everything else until then had been, just writing code that writes to the screen. This is the first one that controlled hardware.
Okay.
And that was really cool. And I ended up making $250 for that, but it gave me, this is how I talk to a modem. And then I don't know, I almost had an obsession that this is going to take me somewhere. So I uh, I had a daughter at a very young age, and so we're living in a trailer. I had my crappy 386 I was so proud of, though, and just obsessed on it. I mean, I was in college at the time too, but I don't know. It was like, this is where I need to go. And just everything. I mean, started with the basic, just posting messages, and then how do I host files and do a Z modem download, and how do I do this, and how do I, like run a door game, and all that stuff. And it was fantastic. It was on Turbo Pascal 7. And back then, the DOS programming, you were limited to 64K segments for one piece of memory. You didn't have a flat memory model. So you had to use these things called TPUs, Turbo Pascal units, which is the closest you can say now. It would be a DLL, dynamic link library. So I would write as much code as I could in the main, and then have to split off certain things into TPUs. And that gave me a whole big insight into, okay, this is how we do object-oriented programming. This is how we split stuff up into, kind of natively, like today you try to do one thing, do it well, the solid principles, and, didn't know that term back then, but I actually learned that in an interview for a job. I didn't know, how do you describe the solid principle? I have no idea what you're talking about, but they explained it to me, and I went, thank you. But so I knew it for the next interview. But really, it was so hard to get those old machines to do anything for you. I think I had a whopping 4 megs of RAM, and I was pretty proud of that at the time. I have 4 million of something. I'm a millionaire, but and then that just boosted me. And
so did you sell this program, this BBS program?
I sold one copy, and then they didn't end up using it. So, but that's okay.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your experiences then as a Sysop. Do you have a big user base?
I got pretty big. I mean, I was originally constrained. I had one phone line, and so people had to wait in line. But it got to the point where I had to shut the ringer off at night, because I had a phone connected to that too, and I had to shut that off because it would ring all night. I mean,
sure.
Kearney's not a big area. There wasn't much to do. There was like one other BBS, and eventually one of my, the guys that came to mind started his own, and I helped him out extremely. Wasn't like I was trying to be the only. I went over and helped rebuild his computer one time, stuff like that. It was really cool, and just got to meet a lot of cool people. And really came down to, at the time, I was trapped in the country with no driver's license, and originally, by the time this happened, yes, I was old enough to drive, had a car, all that stuff, but that was in the back of my mind, and so it was really cool to get to know people, including a good friend of mine was one of the DJs that did the 7 to midnight on the local rock station, and me and him ended up becoming good friends. And he would even put in plugs for free about, he wouldn't go directly, but because he played Trade Wars on my BBS a lot, and he was like, yeah, make sure you check out, port 442 or whatever his port number was, and so it just got bigger and bigger. And finally, one of the local computer store owners, I was in there one day, and he's like, so what is this Castle Evermore BBS thing? Because I'm selling a lot of modems to get to it, and I'm like, oh, wow, cool. And he goes, hey, you want to do something together, make it bigger? And I'm like, yeah, my biggest problem is I have knowledge and no money. Well, I got the money and no knowledge. So we went from there. And so that at that point, though, I would have needed a much better machine running some kind of a more if I would have had Linux back then, I could have done it. But, didn't have a multitasking OS. I had DOS, and then I had like Windows 3.0, which was horrible. But, so we ended up at that point, I had to make the hard decision to ditch my software, buy Wildcat internet server, whatever it was. It was BBS software that had been adapted to the web. You could access it, normal dial-up. You could access it via a web interface, or also you could dial in and get to the internet, So we ended up getting a 64K frame relay connection to the internet, and actually 56K, which seemed really fast at the time, but
sure,
times change. So got it up to 16 lines inbound, and our whopping at least the internet then was generally Telnet, and not, I would have been destroyed if there was lots of pictures or anything like that. And so went from there. And then after a while, the local cable company, they were locally owned. Otherwise, this would have never happened. They were like, hey, we've been trying to do cable modems. We know the radio frequency technology part of it, but we don't know anything about data. You want to kind of fuse? And so got to start up, go to the next phase where I ended up building the first publicly available cable modem system in the entire state of Nebraska. And that there's some trick words there. Cox was already up, but they were still in beta. We were but also we had a much smaller cable network than Omaha. So,
Sure.
it's fuzzing stuff to look good on a resume.
Does this still exist, this entity?
They sold it all to I ended up, I don't know, once it was all perfect until we started to make money, and then it became, investor relations stuff, which I had never dealt with ever. I was in love with the tech, not in the money, and
Yep.
it started to get real flaky once we actually started to make a profit. And then they basically were trying to kick me out of my own company, even though I owned 55% of it. It got really weird. And that's probably all that I should say about that. But at that point is when I happened to hook up with a recruiter that ended up getting me that job at First National, where I met you.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. So do you have any interesting stories as a Sysop?
I
Any user parties? You meet any weirdos, anything like that?
got to know a lot of people, but nothing really weird happened. I mean, just it got a little weird. People were starting to recognize who I was and talking to me, and people liked me, and it was cool. And the worst ever was like one time I went to rent a movie at the video store, and it took me like an hour and a half because everybody wanted to talk to me.
That's
Which,
very interesting.
I was famous in my little microcosm of Kearney. So there's my 15 minutes of fame, but it was in the middle of Nebraska. So,
That's still pretty cool.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so are you into the Telnet BBS scene that exists now?
Not as much as I was, but yeah, that was one of the biggest attractors. I mean, before even I was providing internet service, ISCA had a place in my heart, Iowa State Computer Association, BBS, and it
Right.
still exists, although Iowa State has nothing to do with it anymore. But still go there occasionally. Used to go to other ones like Oklahoma University had OU BBS. That was really cool. They had, it wasn't just a chat. It was almost like a dial-up BBS that you had a lot of problems because Telnet, especially back then, I don't know what's changed. I guess they figured ways around it or it just died. But basically, it's a 7-bit protocol. So if you're trying to send some extended ANSI sequences to dry your screen, they get eaten because those are 8-bit. And Telnet was, I really never looked into it that much, but they had figured it out. It's a beautiful BBS. You could both get on there, play different games, chat with people, download software, whatever, and it was accessible via Telnet. And I really like that one. And then it's been gone for years. And then I think my first one ever was a chat only BBS called Hotel California. I have no idea where it was. And then there was something in Finland I used to hang out a lot. And of course, other small ones I would visit and, I can't remember the names anymore.
So what hobby computing did you do then after the BBS era? Did you get into hosting web-based bulletin boards? You do web development?
Yeah, I've still got messagebase.net, which I originally wrote in like 1998, back when I was still working at the bank. And it's now I'm getting ready to release version 6.0, which is now based on Microsoft's Blazor framework. It's their new single page application framework. And problem is I have a couple games I've written that run along the side of it. And previously with just MVC, that's what Message Base 5 is written, and it's really easy to pass off your authentication to those and you stay logged in. Well, the whole game is different with Blazor, and I haven't quite figured that out. I have the games done, but right now it's a manual login for each one, and I'm like, I need to do the pass through, and that's where I'm at right now. It's my current last couple of weeks frustration, but that's going to come out. But yeah, all the way back to I did this. It's kind of a Raid on the Forest, or it's kind of a Legend of the Red Dragon clone, which is one of the big BBS door games.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I rewrote one called, it was based on it but different, called Raid on the Forest of Horrors. It was so weird. About, I think it was 2000 or 2001. It actually got pretty busy. People were into it. I had a whole bunch of kids. What was weird is they hit it at like 4 a.m. A bunch of kids before they went to school in England would get on, and it became that. And then one time, my guy's name on there is my old D&D character name of Clom Dark. One time I was over at that, I forget the name of the bowling alley over in right by Mall, where Mall of the Bluffs was. And yeah. And I had put my name in instead of my name, I put in Clom Dark. All of a sudden I got this guy walking up. Hey, are you the Clom Dark from Raid on the Forest of Horrors? I'm like, whoa, I guess I get another 30 seconds of fame. Cool, And yeah, so I got on that day and I gave him a whole bunch of extra stuff. And it went good until, I learned my lesson about backups. One day I lost the database and I
no,
didn't have a backup. And yeah, so I've rebuilt a new version of it, all ready to go. But
was this kind of the users could play concurrently, or was it multiple users play a single game, or what?
You could, yeah, there was even online combat between each other. That was hard to do, especially, I think my backend then was on Microsoft Access for the database.
Okay. What?
The old, they don't even make that anymore, but, it came with Microsoft Office back then, their cheap level database server. And
so we kind of glossed over this. You talked about your college years. I'm assuming you were a comp sci major.
Sometimes that was really my thing, but to get out the quickest, I realized it'd be easiest to switch over to telecommunications management with an emphasis in information systems. So that's what I did, which worked out good as a BBS guy or a internet guy here in a couple of years from when I started. Even my main professor would call me, what do you think? And I'm like, wow, I never expected professors to call me and ask me questions, So
very good. What are your favorite tech tools now? I assume the Microsoft development stack of some sort.
Yeah, I'm big C# .NET. Well, it's been .NET Core, and all of a sudden they dropped the core name, so now it's just .NET 6 or whatever, .NET 7, .NET 8. I'm really looking forward. They've added a lot of cool stuff. I'll wait till it gets out of pre-release.
Do you run that on Windows hardware, or because you can run that on non-Windows, correct?
Yeah, I have right now for my home stuff. The problem is I use a lot of integrated authentication, so I don't have to store passwords in source control. And you can do it. I just haven't figured out how to do it yet to link Linux. And I'm sorry, I say Linux. Everybody else calls it Linux, but there was a big battle around 1998 of how to pronounce that, and I picked the wrong side and stuck with it. So it's Linux is Unix, so it's Linux to me, and I've had people you don't even know what you're talking about. Yeah, I actually do. I just have a weird pronunciation.
Yeah, cool it, man. That's Grandark. He knows. Okay. What have we not talked about that you'd like to throw in here?
My big career in porn movies. No, let me bring my article. My laptop shut down, or I made a bunch of notes. I think one of the things that's been fun for the years, because I originally wrote the BBS in Turbo Pascal, and that language was designed by a Danish guy named Anders Hedelsberg.
Yeah.
And he went on from Turbo Pascal and designed C#, and then he went on to design TypeScript. And it's like, I wonder, because my he's Danish. I'm like, 7/8 Danish. I wonder if it's just a Danish mindset. I follow his ways of thought way better than the Java guys. I get on Java and they're so close in syntax, and I can't get anything accomplished. So
have you heard any of the interviews with Anders?
I think I've heard at least one.
There's a couple really good podcasts. I'd have to look them up because I can't remember the podcast name. And there's one that there's one that I think came out right after they introduced what was their replacement for inline SQL? They had a technology over a
Oh,
decade
for
ago.
link to SQL or entity framework?
Link, yeah,
Yeah,
LINQ.
yeah.
They were talking about that as though it was relatively new at the time of this
Mhm.
particular interview, but it was just a great insight from him on language design
Yeah.
and the process that they go through, or that he would go through, to when they would make revisions to C sharp, to put it out to a basically a test group who would actually get to use the pre-release and gather feedback on how they were using it and see, are these language features doing for them what we're thinking they are. So they're very methodical about the changes to that. And I'd been a long time Java programmer myself, and I could see on the C sharp side of the house, initially I wrote it off as kind of a Java wannabe,
It was. Yeah.
but it's evolved. I mean,
Yeah.
it it has
Yeah,
actually, in my opinion, evolved better than as a language than Java has.
I agree. So I
So,
was doing Java for my job last year, and it was such a struggle for thing. I have never like in .NET to add like a Swagger interface to your API.
mhm.
It's about 3 minutes. On Java, it's do this, add this build step, add this, and it was like this is ridiculous. Something that I thought was easy all of a sudden took me a couple of days to figure out how to do in Java. I was like, this is retarded. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Edit that.
I think I think it's faster once you get it down. But I was speaking more along the lines of, it took Java quite a while to get lambdas and,
Yes.
things like that. It just seemed like C sharp was advancing as a language faster.
Yep.
And it was there's just places in the language where it seems to be warmer and more intuitive, where there's still some, why would
Yeah, they
we
seem
want
awkwardly
this
bolted
feature?
on to Java.
Yeah.
At least they're there now. Like the I forget what it is. Not Kotlin, another one of those tweaks of it, but where you finally like have auto properties like C Sharp's had since day one.
Yep.
It's and
Yep.
it's not hard to write a property where you actually have to write your getters and setters, but it's more like I got better things to do. Why isn't this here yet? So that
Yep. Yep. Yep.
anyway, yeah. So what was I going to say? I forget. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you if there was anything else we hadn't covered, because I
Oh
think
yeah.
are you active in the BBS scene at all today? Or do you get onto any
These
internet message boards or anything like that?
just bbs.isca. What's it called now? No, isca bbs. Like if you go to my thing, I forget what the address is because I go to my own. I have a place that you can get to it via web interface, but it does telnet for you. But
Hmm.
uh, iscaclient.labmic.net, which Labmic is my name, Kimball spelled backwards.
Hmm.
And yes, it's telnet, it's not encrypted. Technically I could read your stuff. I never have. I have nothing logged. So, I hope people are using it. So I don't know.
I did just hop on that and kick the tires tonight. So
Cool, cool,
I
cool.
thought that was very interesting. So I will put the links to that in the show notes when I publish this. So folks will be able to just bombard your server then with requests to log into the
Yep.
ISCA BBS.
Nice.
All right. Hey, Ben, thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate this.
Yeah. Hey, it's great to talk to you again. It's been a while.
We're,
Thank you for your past. I mean, I was kind of a dummy when I got to First National, and you were quite kind to me. So
I don't remember that part.
I felt, I have always dealt with a little bit of imposter syndrome, actually quite a bit, and
Is that right?
yeah,
I didn't know that. Well, I'm glad to call you friend, and I always enjoy our talk. So thank you very much for being on.
thank you too.
I'd like to thank Ben again for his time. I hope you all enjoyed the show. Let's do this again soon. Take care.